Right. I'm with Mike Jackson, the Constable of St Brelade. We're in the parish hall, and the reason being that a couple of days ago we had the Comité de Constable, the Constable's Committee meeting, which I've been campaigning for years, so I don't know whether it's got anything to do with my campaigning. I doubt it very much, but that was the first of these meetings which were partly open to the public. And I hope that is a trend which will continue. Is there more to come, Constable?
Well, we shall see. Effectively, the minutes of the Comité have been available since 2014, right. So there's been no attempt to conceal anything. Right. The latest idea of opening it to the public was stimulated by the Constable of St Helier, who for some years has opened his Roads Committee to members of the public, and it seemed right and proper that the Comité followed that example, and it was agreed by other constables at our last meeting, and we put it into practice at the meeting you attended at St Wan's on Monday. Right.
Now, was there anything different about, apart from the fact that the public could attend if they wished, was there anything different? That was a standard Comité meeting, was it? That's how, as they always are?
Yes, indeed. That's the same formula we've always used. Right. The only difference we might have to consider is how we publicise right. personal information, which we have to be careful about under the Freedom of Information law. But apart from that, there was very little business after the meeting which you attended, and I hope that that'll follow the same formula for future meetings.
What I particularly noticed, there was no dissent in the meeting. There was pretty much agreement on everything that was discussed. As far as I could hear, I couldn't hear very well what was going on. So it rather made me think, what does it add? I mean, obviously in theory you have to consult the constables, but there wasn't a lot of different opinions. So if you consulted one constable or two constables, you'd pretty much know what the view of the constables was, I thought.
That's not always the case. I have to say every meeting is different, and at some meetings there is considerable dissent if a particular subject matter comes up, particularly when expense for the parish is involved, and constables are very defensive of their budgets, and whilst the government might suggest that parishes do X, Y or Z, it has an impact on ratepayers, and constables are very conscious of that.
Well, strictly at a parish level, I can see the logic. Obviously, the parishioners have to agree what individual parishes are going to do. But if you've got the opportunity for all 12 parishes to come together, they're all going to disagree on rates, possibly, or something. They're going to disagree. That's a possibility. But I mean, rates as such were only... everything that was discussed was not discussed in great detail. There were points of view being expressed. Some things were satisfactory, some things were not. But it wasn't out to reform things. This is what I was puzzled at. And what especially puzzled me was that you had the Minister for Infrastructure, the new one, who's got every problem in the island seems to be falling on his shoulders. So, and I thought, obviously this is going to create things which are not strictly to one parish. There's going to be all 12 parishes, but viewed in a global all-island sense, which is exactly what I thought. Obviously, he was there to be questioned and to answer questions about things which were not strictly parish. I mean, everything's parish if you care to say so. If you do something in St Helier, that's parish matter, but it doesn't necessarily affect you in St Brelade, does it?
No, but there are common areas, and I think that was the reason for inviting the Minister for Infrastructure, the common areas being how roads in our parishes are dealt with by his department.
Right.
And when there are shortcomings, which there have been over the last year or so, we want to get those regularised, and effectively we did obtain the answers we asked for, we requested, subsequent to the meeting, as to why weeds on roadsides weren't being cleaned, which is their responsibility, so we could understand that. The parishes, of course, are responsible for the smaller parish roads, and government is responsible for the larger main roads. And so there is a lot of overlap and crossing, and likewise in St Helier, some are state, some are parish, some are government. That's right. So to the public, I know it appears confusing, but we do understand the ones that are ours, and most parish roads tend to be in better condition, dare I say, than the government ones, because we feel we administer them better.
Well, they get more minute attention, I presume.
They do indeed. So when you get weeds growing by the roadside, the Roads Committee, who have responsibility for our parish roads, do ask the question of their connétable, and it's us to
I must say, I would have thought that had been sorted out all the years that there have been parishes and central government. It's been around for a long time. I would have thought those sort of things had been well sorted.
Well, we're quick to question failure, if you like, failure of performance. So it is a performance monitoring body to a certain extent, which isn't a bad thing. And members of the public will come to their constables and ask why isn't this, that or the other being done, and whilst it isn't our direct responsibility, we will ask the minister in question. We could ask him in various former, if you like, we could ask him a question in the States in the same way, but sometimes it's more productive in a body such as the Comité de Connétable.
They weren't, the 12 constables weren't all present. I don't know, they've obviously got perfectly good reasons. I expect the ones that weren't there, I couldn't see, or I could only see backs of heads of some constables. Yeah. So I don't know who actually was absent, but about 3 I think were absent.
Well, it'll be in the minutes, and there were justifiable reasons why.
Yeah, for sure.
Someone there, the Constable of St Martin's had a funeral to attend and turned up later, so she was able to fulfil that obligation as well. But it's inevitable with 12 people, there things will happen.
Somebody's always going to be ill or something.
It's not always the case. I mean, quite often it's a body that's well attended in practice, generally speaking. The
fact that there were only, in fact, two members of the public sat throughout, I was one of them, so there was only one other person. There was one guy came and disappeared. I have no idea who he was. And I was disappointed personally, since this is a procedure I want to happen. But the fact, it rather makes me think that constables aren't quite as popular as they claim, or is claimed for them. Because I would have thought the parishioners would want to hear these discussions, and I was surprised they didn't.
Well, it's the philosophy is that we want to try and encourage more public interest at parish assemblies at the first stage, and then, of course, the comité as well. And we'll try all angles to do that. So it's a learning curve for us. We're happy to adapt as necessary. You made a few points to me in writing, which I appreciate, and I'm happy to develop. So what is the answer? I think we'd all seek that, but when there's something controversial, you'll always fill up a parish hall because everybody wants to have their say, but when it's the mundane, run-of-the-mill licensing or election matters, it seems to be limited.
That's the sort of issue I'm worried about, because without going outside your parish, I can't quite see what the committee is expected to do, because they have to go back, whatever decisions are made at committee, they have to go back to the parish anyway to be agreed or not agreed. So I'm having a little difficulty understanding, bearing in mind there is a deputy for all the constituencies anyway. There are, under the revised scheme, there are deputies. Now, I can't, the fact that I'm stuck on a very uncomfortable seat, really, because I want more participation, but I don't want more participation if it's not actually directed at changing things or modifying things or getting the people involved. And clearly, there was no great fervour there that I heard to change anything particularly. There was discussion about green lanes, I couldn't hear what it was all about, and that's obviously been a point of discontent for years. I think still some parishes don't have green lanes. Whether that's, why that is, I have no idea. But there were issues like that which can be resolved, but they don't have to go to a committee. Basically, those are things which could go to the states, couldn't they?
Well, I think the parochial approach is localised, as you say, but it does have a widespread effect. And of course, in terms of green lanes, yes, some parishes at present don't, but you may have heard at the meeting that those constables that haven't proposed to take a suggestion to their parish assemblies that they do. Yeah. So that is going in that direction. And I don't think that's really a state's decision, that is a parish decision, and they will be looking to link with their neighbouring parishes in whichever way they can so that the green lanes do tie up. There are some in some parishes that don't link, and that was why a question was asked of the Minister whether actually it was necessary for the green lanes to link. And his, or the officer's answer was that perhaps it wasn't, and it was up to a parish to decide. So I've got a particular green lane which isn't linked, which I know the residents would like to be a green lane, so I think I'll take that to a future parish assembly for approbation, and that seems to be the right way to do it. But there is a traditional structure. We've got the roads committees, we've got the constable. Public can feed in to whoever they like. They can feed into me direct, they can feed into roads committees, they can feed into deputies who will in turn probably come back to me on a lot of the local parish stuff, and we'll attempt to deal with it. But it has to be within the parameters of the law, which is often the difficulty.
Well, it seems to me that you've got a department, the infrastructure it's got professional road designers, it's got all sorts of people, and they've got all sorts of hats to wear. They're concerned with bus services and so on. So I wouldn't have thought after all these years it wouldn't be too difficult to have a fairly comprehensive road plan of the island, which marks on which ones the state's infrastructure department are totally responsible for, and the ones they're not totally responsible for, and decide what's going to be the policy. And they could decide centrally what ought to be green lanes. I mean, whether the parishes will support that, that's... I'm not sure.
We know whose roads are which, there's no question about that, but principally the IHE department, as you may have heard, are very short on staff. A lot of their work is contracted out these days, and in fact if we wanted road design work done on parish roads, we had to pay a contractor to do it. They hadn't got the staff to do that anymore.
So, well, again, it feeds because obviously my basic worry, as you know, is that constables shouldn't be in the States at all. That's my concern. And I'd love to see the constables organising their parishes much more as centres of entertainment. I mean, there was a fabulous antiques fair here I came along to, and it was a fabulous atmosphere around this parish hall. Now, that sort of activity I thought was brilliant. Now, that's a parish activity, or could be. I mean, it's not. It has an all-island overspill because it's antiques, isn't it? But those sort of things, as information centres, the parish could be much better as information centres for tourists, for people. But I don't want constables who have been elected or chosen in their parishes without proper elections, which is the old story, and dictating things which are going on all island. If a constable hasn't been elected, by my terminology, I mean, I think it was 9 constables had none of the above option because they were not contested in the last election. So that wasn't a great change from previous elections. So that hasn't improved much. The changed format hasn't changed that. Obviously, what I'm saying is, in a roundabout way, constables, if they want to be in the States, have to be elected to be in the States. Being elected to be a parish representative is not a ticket to go to the States. Now, I fear that by opening it up to some degree of public participation, which is good at one level, there will be more an argument for them to carry on as they are. In other words, elected at parish level, but speaking in the States. No, I don't want that. I don't suppose they take any notice of me. But before the last election, there was a lot of dissent about the role of the constables, more than I've ever heard. And if a vote had been taken on that issue, I think it would have been very close whether the public would have gone along with constables being in automatic right in the seat. We've already had the argument, but I think the flavour has changed, I think, since then. I don't think the public is so keen.
Well, we all have different perceptions. My perception is that we're closer to the public than a lot of other states members because we see them on a daily basis, because of the parish halls being the hub of the community and dealing with the day-to-day requirements of the public, such as, whether it be the driving licences, the dogs, or this, that, or the other. And of course, planning issues, albeit not our responsibility as such, will come to us. And I've got 2 communications the last couple of days, which I'll respond to today, where people are really concerned about a planning application which could well affect their lives. And whilst planning applications are very subjective, and I wouldn't get it into the design of a building if it has an impact on a parish road, whereby others are going to be affected, or road safety is going to be affected, or even the services thereabouts are going to be affected. We have an obligation to do something about it. Now, those services round about the roads obviously are provided by government, so it is important that we have this linkage with the government to be able to understand what they're doing. And one of the discussion points at the last meeting was over JEC, the implications of the JEC having to extend their resource throughout the island to provide charging services for cars, heating and cooking and so on. And the fact that it's awfully expensive. If you live down the end of the lane, you have to have that electricity supply extended at enormous expense. And the JEC is suggesting, oh, well, we're going to have to dig up lots of roads in the island to do this. Well, the implications of digging all those roads up are the disruption to local neighbourhoods, to local businesses, and all that goes with it.
But that is fairly obvious, isn't it?
Well, it is. But
does it need the intervention of a constable to draw it to somebody's attention? I don't know. Does it?
Well, it does. I mean, you'll find as soon as anyone digs up a road, there's enormous howls of anguish because people's lives are disrupted for a time. As soon as it's done, they tend to be more content, but there is disruption during the process, and that needs to be put.
But that, unfortunately, is politics generally, isn't it? Unless it affects me personally, and then you suddenly hear the hammers going, you say, "Oh, this is affecting me.
Oh, yes.
I'm going to say something."
Yes.
But that is what politics is all about. People don't wake up until it affects them.
And in a way, I think that's the role. The role of the constable is to, I suppose, be aware of what's coming, certainly in planning terms, and keeping an eye on the planning register, because the same thing you just mentioned is people don't realise until the diggers start going in the field next door, and suddenly their lives are going to be turned over. So we try and get that information out to people or respond to those who put.
But even at parish level, you don't get many. I mean, you get some. I appreciate that. I mean, some parishes have got a clique of people who turn up at parish meetings. I've never been involved in the parish system. I've never really taken much. I have attended meetings, of course I have, but I've never thought of serving as a parish. And it's a world, people are loyal. I do understand that. People do have a sort of an enthusiasm for parish because it's parish. And I just don't get that message, I'm afraid.
Well, there are different sectors of the community, and the parish, the municipality, if we can call it that, is one. You'll get the various organisations within parishes which all have their bodies of support, whether it's the Battle of Flowers Association, whether it's the church groups in their various guises. We have community groups, we have Communicare here in St Brelade, which has a strong following of various bodies. It organises or provides the place for various bodies to meet. So there are a multitude. Then of course you get the various school attached organisations. So I think everyone has their preferred meeting place within a community, and long may it last.
The fact that there is, generally speaking, the constables are fairly right-wing. I don't know if you would agree with me on that, but there are not many. There's no member of the Reform Party, for example, as far as I know, is a constable. I don't think the Reform Party stood against. They didn't contest any seats for constable. It's a sort of it's got a strange momentum all of its own, the constables.
There was a reform candidate in the 2018 election.
That's right.
Who
dropped out, didn't
dropped out. She dropped out for whatever reason. So it's nothing to stop anybody standing, and I'm sure they would get support should they.
But I was surprised also that some of the retiring politicians didn't stand for constable. And what I'm just trying to say is, I don't think it's quite the organisation, or they're not quite the role that people see them as. They are traditional. I mean, I went to the St John after the constable there was dismissed by the Royal Court, and they had to discover lots of procedural things. What could they do now? How do you get rid of your constable? And these sort of questions came up, which I would have thought would have been established in the 17th century. But anyway, these things came up, and they had a meeting. The procurers were brought before the court, and it was rather painful because the commissioner, who was the former bailiff, was visibly wanting to support the parishes. He didn't want to see it damaged. And he said, well, we're not going to punish you. He was most emphatic. That was what he said during the hearing. But it will be referred to the Attorney General so that they, the Attorney General of all people, can produce a rule book and look at the rules. Now, I don't know if that's been produced yet, but I would have thought that would have been an issue. That should have gone to the parishioners of 12 parishes, if they're going to have changes of the rules.
Well, there'll be no rule changes, because there aren't really any rules applying to procurers. But
well, it was the whole parish.
What's been arranged, and which was mentioned at the meeting you may or may not have picked up, is that there's going to be some guidelines put in place, and there are some presentations being, which have been arranged during the month of October, to which procurers have been invited to attend, right. To help. And effectively, that's going to be a step in the right direction. Procurers are volunteers, and the oath, the procurer's oath, basically says you'll manage the funds of the parish as you would your own. Very simple oath. And of course, well, they do, and some are more careful than others, I suppose. Yeah. So, but I think the guidelines being produced will be helpful to them, to anybody new coming to the role who thinks, what on earth am I supposed to do? I think it can only help. But that process by which those rules, guidelines as you call them, are going to be produced, by who say so? Well, it's been stimulated by the Commissioner's report after the St John's case that has been picked up on, and we'll do anything we can to align ourselves with that thinking. I think it's the right thing we should be doing. Do you anticipate that the public will get their say on it? Well, that presentation is purely for the procurers. We invite any member of the public to contribute to the committee in any way which they like. I mean, they can email the committee direct and ask for their views to be presented to the committee. They can ask to make a personal presentation to the committee if they want. But it has to be done in an orderly fashion, and it has to be tabled for a future meeting. We're very receptive to that. Because what I heard, I didn't understand. You learn things all the time, at least I do. That's when that was going on in the court. They were referring to how the complaint arose in the St John example. And partly it was to do with church officials from another parish. It wasn't of the St John's parish. They were officials somehow in the system. And they'd made it known that something wrong had happened, or they thought a decision had been made without permission or something. And I thought, what a strange system this is, if decisions are leaking from one parish to another. I can't remember the detail of it, but in terms of the church link, I thought the rector is ex officio part of the Roads Committee, and the rectors will have an interest in parish matters. It's part of their role. So I can't remember the detail of the St John's affair, quite frankly, but it's not unexpected for a parish rector to have some involvement in what goes on in the parish. Yeah, of course. Now we've got this strange system where we've got constituencies over 3 parishes. I don't know how that's going to work out. But personally, I would have thought it was a great opportunity to rationalise the system even more. I mean, I'm not a great fan of senators as such, but you're going to finish up with constables, which was made abundantly clear to me, constables being a sort of a quasi-senator. This is what they're going to be. Not elected as such, but elected as constables as they are, but having the role. Because the fact that you had the infrastructure minister, the next meeting I gathered was going to be the housing minister. After or before that, you're going to have the international affairs minister. And I was thinking to myself, well, these are not parish issues, are they? Let me correct you. The international affairs, external and community, we have the international affairs minister and the external affairs minister. Right. A bit confusing. But Deputy Labby, of course, has responsibility for communities as well. So the parishes are integrally linked with the communities. But it was, of all the things I've heard repertoire, was the international identity, which I thought referred to in my notes. The international has been something that the UK government has pushed upon the dependent territories for several years. Yes. The international image of Jersey. Now, I mean, obviously everything that happens here has potential to have an impact if you... Well, yes. I mean, I think it's important that we are cognizant of the international impact in what we do in the parishes, because we are pro-Jersey, apart from being pro-parishes. I mean, I'm, should we say, initially I'm a Brelade. I was born in Brelade. I'm a Jerseyman. I'm British, and so we go down the line like that. But we can't ignore the fact that we are part of the international community, and we're very quick to support it.
I mean, I noticed when the mini island plan was being prepared, a great number of constables were supporting developments in their parishes for housing, because there was a spin-off for the parish, children's playgrounds, that sort of thing. Now again, I thought, it's a funny use of their power in the parish to bring to an all-island problem, which is a housing shortage, to influence, because at the end of the day, they're sort of a bit of a, I'll twist my arm, you twist my arm, I'll get a children's playground and you get some houses. Now that might be perfectly legitimate, but I thought it's not a very democratic system.
Well, I think the reason why constables are trying to push for housing developments was they're very, very aware, as they're very close to the ground, of the desperate need of some families, first of all, to remain in the parishes of their birth and live near their families, and that's the primary concern. Now, very often there will be planning gains in the terms of playgrounds or other such things that will be attached to that, and there's nothing wrong with that, because if you have additional housing, you do need the additional facilities that go with it in terms
it is, but it doesn't, the constable's involvement doesn't stop there, because a lot of the constables want to decide who gets the housing. They want people that they approve of to have the housing. And it was expressed to me at the planning meetings before that one, when they were doing the island plan, a constable said, I want, because our honorary system is struggling, that I want people who I know will support the honorary system. Well, to me, that was almost like, that was
it's been a subject of debate, and Deputy Gardner brought a proposition whereby, I can't remember, was it 50% of the those having housing allocated to them had to be outside the parishes. It's not so crucial in this parish, because we've got a broad parish and a lot of support and residential in the parish anyway. Some parishes haven't, and it's more pertinent in those cases, and it was the case in Trinity some years ago when there was some development, because they were down to just one small village, and that just didn't have the capacity to provide the people necessary to cover, as you suggested, the honorary police. So I think personally people who live in parishes do like to stay there, and the question has to be asked, should they have first dibs at the housing opportunities or not? And maybe that's a subject for further discussion, but it certainly was agreed that a percentage needs to go to non-parish residents.
yes, it's a point of view, but it's a discriminatory view, I think. But there we are. I mean, if they accept that, I mean, there's plenty of discrimination about it in all sorts of aspects of life. So I don't like to see it formalised. Maybe...
the truth of the matter, in St Brelade we don't keep a housing list, because it's dealt with by the housing gateway. So when the time comes, and we've been through various incarnations of developments in the parish, in fact we're swamped with them, but those were allocated by the housing department at the time, and I would expect that to prevail in the future.
The election, we've got to have another one in 4 years' time. Presumably you'll be still around to contest it, if there is a contest for constables.
Well, 4 years is a long time. There's a lot of water to go under the bridge.
It certainly is.
We'll see. I think it's important, actually, at my advanced age, that one sees successors coming through. And I would like to see people looking or aspiring to the role, because it's a sort of role which is different to that of a deputy. There's a lot of admin stuff. There are areas which are going to provide may be unpopular because it's to an extent regulatory, and so you need quite a thick skin to be able to deal with it, and it's not a role that suits everyone.
There aren't many constables actually participating in the Better Way party, non-government, or whatever it is. It's the non-party party. They're not, I mean, at the moment, whether it'll formalise itself into a proper party, I've got no idea. But at the government structure, there's not many constables participating at the government level. Nobody's got a ministry.
No. We're a body of independents still, and
Right.
I think that was demonstrated at the elections. Yes, the Reform Party have got their 10, but the rest are, as I see it, independent. Now, whether that party or that linkage to Better Way will prevail throughout the 4 years is yet to be seen. But I regard myself as an independent. I may vote with Reform, I may not. I may vote with the government, I may not. It depends on the subject matter of the day and the way it's been approached.
Personally, I can't see the Better Way formula surviving for 4 years. I mean, there will be people who have different points of view and they will fragment. What they were torn into, whether they'll come back to reforming some of the parties that have already collapsed, I have no idea. But do you think, in general terms, do you think in 4 years' time, the constable's role will remain the same? Do you think it will? Do you think anybody will have challenged it substantially?
Well, for me, my ideal would be to see it, the parish system, parish assemblies particularly, more popularly supported and attended. Now, in order to do that, I think we have to be more electronic, if I can use that term. We have to use IT to our best ability. In fact, very often, if we've had controversial meetings, we've put it in. At the moment, it's expensive to do, quite frankly, and it's unfair on parishioners to burden them with more expense than they need. But I think as technology moves on, we should be able to do that better. We're not at the voting online stage generally at the elections. Maybe we'll move in that direction. And I think if we could at parish hall level as well, it would be a great advantage. And I think we're all far happier sitting at home looking at something and having to vote if we can than having to turn out on a dark, wet night. So
the committee of constables could fulfil a function in a small way, or to some extent in Guernsey. The parishes there have meetings with the public to discuss the agenda, the BA for the states that's coming up. They get forewarned, they get a published BA, and they know what's going on, and they discuss it. They don't all do this, just some of them do it. Now the committee could be doing that. Now obviously on the showing of only 2 people turning up, there's not going to be much of a discussion, but if you could get a good representation of the public, you could get a good discussion, and obviously with the 12 parishes being represented in a committee, that would be a useful purpose and function, I think. I think that would be good.
Maybe the forum for that is more at parish level, and effectively when a proposition at the moment is lodged au greffe, the state's proposition is lodged au greffe. Historically, the idea was that the constables would take it to their parishioners. It would be discussed before they went back to vote on the appropriate day. So maybe independent parish meetings would address that and give people who are interested the opportunity to give their views. Of course, we do get views online when a proposition is published now, and that will influence my voting pattern, no question about it. I try to ignore my own personal views and take those of the parishioners who I represent.
Well, the constable at St John, I interviewed him a while ago, and he's trying very hard to engage the public. I mean, he's trying to get the people out instead of watching Coronation Street to come and chat to him, but he didn't say that, I said that.
Well, I think we all do. We're all enthusiastic to stimulate public interest. Not everybody's politically motivated, but quite a few people are. And if we can harness that interest in some form or another, I'd be all for it.
Okay, well, I'm not going to press you much further, but would you not see the benefit of constables not being in the States from the parish point of view? The constables could have more duties at parish level, more things to do, put more life into parish-based activities.
I think if I can take the Guernsey example you mentioned, I think the parish role in Guernsey has failed. I mean, as I understand it, the constables, the parishes look after the waterways and brooks and not a lot else. I stand to be corrected on that, but we have our diverse committees within the parish looking after various aspects. We have a rate assessment committee. We have our roads committees I mentioned, who are very busy people. They're all volunteers, and I'm very grateful for the amount of work we put in, and that's not without mentioning the honorary police role, who really support the state's police enormously these days.
They do.
And we link in, we have a community policeman who's very useful in return. So that system at the moment is working very well. And the constables provide I suppose, the coordinating role between all these bodies. And I think it works. I think it would be a shame to break it because it's not broken, and keep it going and enhance it in any way we can.
Do you think the none of the above clause will survive for the next election, or do you think it was irrelevant?
It's one of those. It's personally, having been through that, I would have preferred to have a person as an opponent. It's felt that it creates an election, and there were a lot of votes for some. Some people were keen to vote against it. My philosophy on that would be to understand why those people didn't choose to vote for me, and try and convince them that otherwise, if you like, during the next 4 years. But of course, unless they come forward, I don't know what their arguments are. But I'm happy to work with anybody and try and make the parish a happy place for all to live and survive in.
Okay, I'm going to finish there. Anything else you want to tell us?
No, just thank you for your contribution, for your comments regarding the meeting that you attended, and
right.
It's a learning curve for us, and we shall try and make it easier for the public in the various aspects which are necessary
Well,
for us.
very nice to hear. Good.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.